bond yields everywhere. There are reasons for some optimism in terms of the markets themselves. The prospects for the Italian economy, though, I don't think have changed that much.
Well, the thing is, when you think about Italian politics, the narrative has been twofold. One is the economy, and the other is the relationship with Brussels. And so at least the market perception of a PD five-star alliance is that it would be friendlier to Brussels. But as you say, not clear the impact it's going to have on the economy. What type of measures would you like to see announced out of this potential government when it gets formed?
Well, I think we need to see, unfortunately, a commitment to continued fiscal, not necessarily austerity, but to a sensible medium-term fiscal strategy, which would mean either proceeding with the VAT hike to some degree, and or certain changes to the citizens' income and infrastructure spending. I think if we see them sort of also sitting down and negotiating with Brussels over a longer-term approach to trying to raise Italy's structural growth rate, sustainable growth rate, by looking at these structural issues, that would also help.
But do you think that a government like this, again, comprised of parties who in the past have categorically refused to work with one another, now all of a sudden opportunistically deciding to go into government together? And also, let's not forget, PD were in government for many, many years, and that did have somewhat of a positive impact on growth, but yet they were not able to pass through the reforms that the market wanted to see out of them. What prospect is there for this future government composed of PD and Five Star to actually enact reforms?
Yeah, well, I think the first question is how long will they last as a government? I mean, the average life expectancy of an Italian government is just over 1 year anyway, so that would be the starting point. And as you say, they've been trading insults. They are very odd bedfellows. Yeah. So it would not be surprising if it all fell apart at some point next year. The only thing really holding them together, bizarrely, is that both of them have been doing very badly in the polls, particularly Five Star. So if there were early elections, they would both lose out. So they do have that one discipline keeping them together. In terms of reforms, I think the prospects are not great at all. But I mean, having said that, I also think, unfortunately, Italy is in a debt trap, which means that there will be, there's a crisis brewing in Italy that will occur at some point, particularly if global monetary conditions change.
Right. So for the time being, though, they're benefiting from this very low interest rate environment, which keeps the debt track going. All right, Andrew, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat to us. Andrew Cunningham, Chief Europe Economist from Capital Economics. Also coming up, our relations with Iran about to turn a corner. President Trump says there's a good chance of a meeting after that surprise appearance at the G7 summit. More from Geritz when we come back.
I think Iran wants to get their situation straightened out. Now, is that based on fact or based on gut? That's based on gut. But they want to get their situation straightened out.
There are certain things in life we simply don't talk about. And hemorrhoids are, right up there, so to speak. But we should. Because there's 8 million people in the UK right now suffering with piles. If you're one of them like I was, you should speak to Xroid. They're the Harley Street specialists in hemorrhoid treatment. It's a new, fast, gentle, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids, with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Consultation and treatment starts from $9.95. Xroid, be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
You're in charge of hiring and Indeed has solutions, like sponsored jobs, which increase the visibility of your post in search results to make sure the right candidates find you faster. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are sponsored jobs.
Sponsored jobs receive up to 5 times more clicks than normal job posts. Visit Indeed.com/redeem today and get a free sponsored job upgrade on your first posting. Terms, conditions and exclusions apply.
Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strength and things. Strings and things and strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
Strings and things.
Everyone wants a smooth running home so that they can spend more time enjoying it. The British Gas app allows you to do just that, because with the touch of a finger, you can quickly submit meter readings or book an expert engineer, leaving you more time for watering the borders or a spot of sunbathing. Manage your home account and more all in one place. Download the British Gas app from the App Store or Google Play today.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our Red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try Click and Collect. Just go to tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try Click and Collect at tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
Again.
Welcome to Street Signs. I'm Giovanna Versace, and these are your headlines. European equity markets struggle to gain traction despite optimism over a trade breakthrough after President Trump says China wants to resume negotiations. The art of the deal. Trump strikes an unapologetic tone as he wraps the G7 summit, saying that calling China's Xi his enemy one day and his friend the next is his style.
The way I negotiate, it's done very well for me over the years, and it's doing even better for the country.
The FTSE MIB holds on to gains as Five-Star doubles down on Giuseppe Conte remaining Prime Minister and any future PD coalition suspending further talks until it publicly commits to the condition. And Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says there will be no change to the status quo unless U.S. sanctions are lifted after President Trump signals he's open to a meeting. Well, we had a positive finish to Wall Street yesterday and a better session for Asian markets overnight. Not so much the case for European markets, with most of the bourses trading down in the red. FTSE 100 back from the bank holiday, down about 0.5 of a percentage point. We've also got the DAX and CAC 40 trading in weak territory as well. DAX, we had the German second quarter GDP confirmed at minus 0.1%. We'll talk more about that with Annetta shortly, but definitely the numbers haven't been helping there. FTSE MIB Italian index still trading positive on optimism around the talks between PD and Five-Star. The negotiations are continuing today and tomorrow. Moving on to FX, let's talk you through some of the price action in currency space. Euro holding in around 111. We've been in a really, really tight range the last couple of months for the euro, anything between 110.50 and 112. So despite all of the optics in stock markets, euro has held pretty steady. Dollar yen, we're seeing a bid for the yen overnight, 0.3 of a percentage point. Again, very close to breaking through that 105 handle, and certainly we're getting some comments out of the finance ministry there on the strength of the yen, so something to watch out for. And then cable we have hanging in at 122.40, a little bit firmer on the day versus the US dollar, about 0.25 of a percentage point. And in US futures, I talked about the better close yesterday with all of the majors closing up 1%. Today we've got a little negativity on the board. The three majors are seen opening up in the red, but only slightly so. Dow seen about 46 points weaker. Well, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says there will be no change to the status quo unless the U.S. lifts sanctions. His comments come a day after President Trump said he is open to meeting his counterpart, quote, if the circumstances are correct. Rouhani said Tehran is ready to hold talks only if Washington ends, quote, all illegal, unjust, and unfair sanctions. Steve joins us with more. It sounds as though, Steve, the ball is very much in President Trump's court now.
I don't know, Jumana, and you're a great student of the region as well. I think basically you have two very different opinions about what the other side needs to do in order to start talks, in order to take away perhaps some of the tension in the region. And whilst the Iranians are saying, well, we're not going to change our regional position, we're not going to change our enrichment position, we're not going to change our position on having ballistic assets as well, the US is saying these need to be part of any, as you were saying, lessening or thawing of tension in order to get those talks going again as well. The very important point as well, one needs to be made, and I know Sir Richard Dalton will have a view on this as well. It's not just about the US versus Iran. There are a whole host of regional players who it's absolutely key to be involved in any dialogue as well, because you've got to remember a lot of the US foreign policy in the region is being driven in coordination with the likes of traditional allies, the Israelis, plus perhaps newer allies such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE as well. So there's a whole coalition of interests on one side that need to be considered. Plus, you need to consider the whole JCPOA signatories as well, which of course includes the entire Security Council at the UN, plus Germany. And of course, Russia and China were not even here at the G7 as well. So efforts by Monsieur Macron, great, try and get something going. But when you consider just the names of the countries I've mentioned as well, it gets very, very complicated. But let's listen to a little bit of the rationale of why Monsieur Macron tried to push things forward here, despite the fact that he'd met with the Iranian foreign minister only 2 days before in Paris. He met with the Iranian foreign minister again here in Biarritz. But let's listen in about his rationale.
I decided to invite, as friends, Minister Zarif. So I informed, before making it, I informed President Trump that it was my idea not to involve the United States, not to say this is on behalf of you, of everybody, but to say, as friends, I think it would be a good idea to ask him to go back and try to negotiate something separately. So I did it on my own. I informed, before making it, President Trump. He was informed at each minute about the situation, And the idea for me was, in case of structural move and important move on appropriate solutions, perhaps to have meetings between ministers, not at President Trump's level, because President Trump's level is President Rouhani. So this is my precise answer. This is a French initiative, but made by a clear information of the US president before.
You see, President Macron has been looking for a meaning for the G7. He's been looking for a win for the G7. We talked about earlier how he didn't get wins on the environment. He didn't get a win necessarily on Amazonian rainforest fire coordinated action. In fact, that one has spectacularly fired back at the French as well. But if you're looking for a win on Iran, you've got to remember this is so complicated, and it's not just about the United States and Iran. And again, as our next guest will be talking about as well, the regional players, the vested interests, the Sunni versus Shia debate, which is going on across a whole host of countries, from Syria to Palestine to Lebanon to Yemen as well, and it's going on in a somewhat cold war, sometimes a very hot war as well, is very complicated. Add into that the fact that the Russians like the idea of warm water ports in Syria and elsewhere, and looking for more regional influence. And of course, America wants Russia back in the G7 to make it a G8 again, but the other powers don't want them there, so there's that added complication as well. Plus, you add in the fact that the Chinese are part of the UN Security Council, but of course a major customer potentially for Iranian oil, and we mustn't forget this is about two of the biggest oil players in the world with some of the greatest reserves, i.e. Iran and indeed Saudi Arabia. It's very, very complicated. So yes, did Mr. Macron do the right thing in trying to get things going? Was it perhaps naive, using another French word, to expect any action from the Americans and indeed a coming together despite all those enormous issues? Perhaps not as well. But I mean, look, full marks for trying, but it just hasn't worked, has it?
Nudge in the right direction. Let's see how things pan out. Steve, as ever, thank you for your commentary out of Biarritz over the last couple of days. All right, let's bring in another voice on this topic. Sir Richard Dalton, the former UK ambassador to Iran and president of the British Iranian Chamber of Commerce. Sir, I just want to ask you what your impression is of Mr. Macron inviting Mr. Zarif to attend the G7, not as a formal attendee, but on the sidelines. And certainly he says that he ran it by President Trump beforehand. But was this a diplomatic coup or a diplomatic blunder, in your view?
I don't think it was either a coup or a blunder. I don't think you should look at this event just in the context of the meeting in Biarritz. This was the next logical step in a long-term effort conducted by the French with the support of Britain and Germany, and keeping the United States informed, to reverse the cycle of deterioration in the prospects for security in the Persian Gulf region and in the prospects for the survival of this vital international agreement, the nuclear deal with Iran. So there wasn't something set up which didn't work. This was getting Zarif back to continue the dialogue, to refine it to a point where Zarif could take a package back to his boss, the supreme leader of Iran, and also to his president, President Rouhani, to see whether there is scope for an agreement.
We've heard from Mr. Rouhani overnight, and he said that the only way that they will scale back or stop scaling back on their nuclear commitments is if the U.S. lifts U.S. sanctions. So it seems to me as though Europe are just a bystander in this discussion. What effective leverage does Europe and Macron have over Iran?
Very little leverage. This is about finding an area of mutual interest and defining it in such a way that Iran ceases its challenge to the nuclear agreement. Iran waited a year before responding to the totally unjustified United States rejection and withdrawal from the deal. They have started to escalate pressure, and that pressure is against U.S. interests, and it's also against European interests. So it's right to use diplomacy to try and restore the status quo ante, to get the United States to make a concession which enables Iran, in turn, to return to its full implementation of the nuclear agreement. Remember that nothing that Iran has done in the last few months represents a significant step on the path to a nuclear weapon. So there is time at hand, and there are willing partners in Europe to try and narrow the gaps between the United States and Iran, and I wish them every success.
Well, let's also talk about Iran and its own tactics over the last couple of months, because the seizure of tankers has been occurring with increasing amounts of frequency, more belligerent activity occurring within the Middle East. It's almost as though the Iranian regime feels emboldened by the fact that the U.S. pulled out of the JCPOA deal. How do you think the U.S. and Europe are looking at this? And obviously we spoke about Europe, but how do the U.S. think about this in the context of Iran and the regime actually feeling emboldened to go ahead and do these things that they wouldn't have done in the past?
The United States has been deliberately provoking Iran to withdraw from the nuclear agreement in order to destroy the nuclear agreement and start a different negotiation with a different set of objectives. Secretary of State Pompeo laid them out. They require Iran to surrender all its national interests in the Middle East, to change the nature of its regime, and so on and so forth. It's an intolerable proposition to put to Iran, and it's not surprising, and the United States will have calculated this long ago when they took the steps that they have taken. It's not surprising that Iran should have retaliated in accordance with its long-term policy, which is that if the Persian Gulf can't be used freely by everyone to export oil, then why should anybody export oil in security from that area? Now, everybody has known that that is Iranian policy, and the measures that maybe Iran, probably Iran, took against 4 tankers with no loss of life were meant to be a stark reminder to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and also to the United States of that basic policy by Iran. And it has worked. We have seen much more effort to try and narrow the gap between the United States and Iran, and we have seen Europe step up with, I believe, the support of Russia and China to try to reverse the damaging consequences of the U.S. withdrawal from the nuclear agreement.
Sir, now you were the former UK ambassador to Iran. I want to ask you where UK is in all of this, and perhaps the biggest exemplification of the UK's dilemma is what happened with the Gibraltar incident just a few weeks ago. The question really for Boris Johnson and this government is whose side they on. Are they taking more of a European approach to these discussions with Iran, or are they going to take the hardline approach that the US is espousing?
They are taking the European approach. Policy has not changed in the last month since the UK Prime Minister changed. And that is because it is a fundamental UK security interest to maintain in force the Iran nuclear agreement. Now, it's possible that President Trump might want to see Britain move towards United States positions, but there has been no sign of that taking place so far.
Understood. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. Sir Richard Dalton, former UK ambassador to Iran and president of the British-Iranian Chamber of Commerce there. Now, Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, says she is confident the government can handle the current political crisis. Speaking publicly for the first time since the weekend's protests, Lam acknowledged that the violence was becoming more serious, but maintained that her government was in control. And coming up in a few moments, it's confirmed the German economy contracted in the second quarter. We'll cross live to Frankfurt to discuss how trade tensions are weighing on the engine of Europe. Plus, a capacity crowd at the US Open was treated to a Serena Williams masterclass in the first round against old rival Maria Sharapova. The details coming up in a few.
Imagine a better way to shave with no water and no nicks, bumps, or cuts.
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere. Because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime. And the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you free clones of your best employees. What's that? Oh, no cloning. But there are online skills tests.
Using Indeed skills tests reduces time to hire by 27% on average. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try click and collect. Just go to Tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try click and collect at Tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
Set for Life is the new game from the National Lottery where you can win 10 grand every month for 30 years. So go smash this month, next month, and make every month amazing. Play new Set for Life Mondays and Thursdays.
Set for Life from the National Lottery. Amazing starts here. Prize may be capped. Rules, procedures and game-specific rules apply. Players must be 16 or over.
It was a Sunday morning when I jumped on the tube.
And decided to pop down to Greenwich via
a large indoor jungle.
And when I got there, I was captivated by a sparkling
scary dinosaur just standing there right in front of me.
So off we went to Wembley Park
to look at the colourful fish.
Tap into the wonderful world of off-peak London. Travel in zones 2 to 6 for £1.50. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. £1.50 is an adult off-peak pay-as-you-go fare for a journey not going via Zone 1 on Tube, DLR and most London Overground services. Always touch in and out with the same card or device to pay the right fare.
Welcome back. Germany's economy contracted in the second quarter. Second quarter final GDP confirmed the economy shrunk by 0.1%. The Stats Office said exports fell by more than imports during the period. Annetta joins us with more from Frankfurt. Annetta, it's not going to be a surprise for anyone that some of the weakness in the data came from the trade side of things. Can you give us more color on the detailed breakdown?
Yes, it's exactly quite dramatic when it comes to exports. It's the largest decline in exports since 6 years, and that is clearly weighing on the German economy. A positive or supporting factor comes from household consumption, but also state consumption is up by 0.5%. So we already have a certain degree of fiscal stimulus, the German government would argue, surely, when looking through that data. There's also it's not a dramatic picture the German economy is actually showing in the second quarter. Capital formation is still going quite well. Investments in capital formation are up. The only sector which is going slow is the construction sector, but one has to see that also in the perspective that the construction sector was very, very strong already in the first quarter. So quarter on quarter, this has slowed down, whereas the overall picture when it comes to capital formation is still positive. Another positive factor is actually wage development. That should be an interesting one also for the ECB, because wages are up on average 3% in the second quarter just for Germany, which could actually mean that we're building up some inflationary pressure here from the labor market. But let me bring you also some more commentary on whether the second quarter weakness now will mean that the German government will come up with some fiscal stimulus. This is highly doubtful because clearly the labor market is still doing very well, and Angela Merkel in recent speeches made pretty clear that she is only willing to sort of abolish the balanced budget approach if there was a material deterioration in the labor market. And for now, we don't see that yet. The labor market is still very strong, close to record lows when it comes to natural the employment ratio. It is close to natural employment too, and we still have a lot of shortages, especially in the manufacturing space when it comes to labor. So I guess those who are hoping that the German government will splash out a lot of money to support the economy will be proven wrong, because clearly the factors which are weighing on Germany are coming from outside, and there's not so much the German government can do by spending more. That's at least the line you get from Berlin currently. If the labor market will show really signs of weakness, then there will be measures. I'm sure that has happened during the last recession as well. But just to safeguard the economy as such, the German government will not step in. At least that's the latest what we're hearing from Berlin. Back to you.
Definitely a tricky time for Germany ahead. Thank you for bringing us that, Annetta from Frankfurt. Well, in tennis news, Serena Williams breezed past her old rival Maria Sharapova in just 59 minutes, winning comfortably in straight sets to reach the second round of the US Open. Adam joins us with more. I mean, people call this a rivalry, but the tally now is 20 to Serena versus 2 to Sharapova. That's not really a rivalry, is it?
Not really at all. 15 years it has been since Maria Sharapova last tasted victory against Serena Williams, and this one was never likely to be anything different. 6-1, 6-1, the scoreline, just 59 minutes, as you say. But the strangest thing about this was the fact it was in the first round of the US Open. Just a couple of years ago, you'd say this would be quarter-final, semi-final, final worthy of a Grand Slam. But this was very early on. Sharapova, she's dropped to 87 in the world. She's had a history of recent injuries since she returned from that doping ban in 2017, and she was no match in front of 24,000 fans, including some famous faces in the crowd as well, to see Serena as she chases that 24th record-equaling Grand Slam, which has eluded her so far, losing in 3 Grand Slam finals since she returned to the tour after becoming a mother. She's had injuries this year as well, a huge test in front of her to see if she can last 2 weeks to be champion here again, but it's a long road considering last year, well, she wasn't too happy at the end of the final against Naomi Osaka, and that umpire as well, of course, Carlos Ramos, isn't going to be officiating in her matches this year as well. But after that match, considering the role reversal maybe of putting a mindset of Serena Williams, how would she feel if she'd been on a 19 match, 15-year losing streak against the same opponent?
Gosh, I never thought about it like that, but you know, she keeps coming out and keeps fighting and keeps finding different ways to stay in the match.
It's facing an opponent that's at her stature is extremely difficult in the first round of a slam, with coming in with the fact that I haven't played that much, but you know, those are the situations that I have to keep putting myself in and coming out of them.
All right, so we talked about the 6-1, 6-1 win. Obviously a big win for Serena, very early stages of US Open. But remember, you just mentioned this, 1 year ago, there was that big controversial interaction between Serena Williams and the umpire. What's the latest on that now?
Very interesting, this one. Carlos Ramos, the umpire there, a very well-respected umpire on the tour, isn't going to officiate in any of Serena Williams' matches during this US Open. Even when she was asked about this in her post-match news conference after that, she said, "What do you think about that?" She said, "I don't even know who that is." So clearly something festering underneath there. Serena Williams definitely has her opinions on that situation, but yes, Carlos Ramos isn't going to officiate.
Quickly, let's talk about the male competition. Djokovic is the favourite. He's looking good.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw at the Wimbledon final just the durability of Novak Djokovic over 2 weeks of a Grand Slam. He was facing match points against Roger Federer at Wimbledon, overcame that. He's still looking to close the gap. He could end up with just one step closer to Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer, those Grand Slam leading men. But don't know whether or not he's always as popular as those other two.
We're going to keep an eye. Well, it's always fun to watch the tennis, isn't it? Almost as fun as the cricket, Adam.
Almost.
Almost these days. Thanks for breaking it down for us. A quick look at US futures before we head out. Yesterday was a positive session. Today we've got all 3 majors pointing to open up in the red, slightly below the flat line, but still nothing too momentous. That is it for today's show, however. I'm Joanna Versace. Worldwide Exchange is coming up right after this. Stay with us.
Think you need to pay prestige prices for better skin results? Try Olay Regenerist.
They say less is more. But at MG, we say more is more. That means more spec than ever in the value-packed MG3, including a reverse parking camera and LED daytime running lights to bring your journey to life. MG3, big on spec, skinny on price. From just $9,495 on the road, including a 7-year, 80,000-mile warranty. Make Tuesday your MG3 test drive day at WLMG Marylebone. MG, color the road. Specifications subject to model.
If it isn't dead, if it ever comes back, we'll come back to.
On September 6th.
This meeting of the Losers Club has officially begun.
They're back, and so is he.
We didn't stop it.
The clown.
Starring James McAvoy and Jessica Chastain.
For 27 years, I dreamt of you.
See how it all ends.
I craved you.
It, Chapter 2.
I missed you.
In cinemas September 6th. Book tickets now, rated 15.
There are certain things in life we simply don't talk about. And hemorrhoids are, right up there, so to speak. But we should, because there's 8 million people in the UK right now suffering with piles. If you're one of them like I was, you should speak to Xroid. They're the Harley Street specialists in hemorrhoid treatment. It's a new, fast, gentle, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids, with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Consultation and treatment starts from $9.95. Xroid, be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore. And dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike, and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet, and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind, and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Quays. Waterfront outlet shopping.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
Did you know Currys PC World do business? Saving your business up to 30% with mega deals on computers and printers, electricals, large screen TVs, and even more. Top brands like HP, Microsoft, Epson, Sony. And if you find it cheaper from any major retailer, we'll match it. Get these deals before they're gone. Must end soon. Visit your nearest store or pcworldbusiness.co.uk/megadeals. T's and C's apply. Excludes Inc. and third-party sellers. Visit website for price promise details. Claim within 7 days.
5 at 5. One and done. Major averages coming off 1% gains or better yesterday on possible cooling of U.S.-China trade tensions. But has the rally already run out of gas? Recession risks front and center. Top global money managers sounding the alarm over a possible global recession. But one major U.S. consumer CEO isn't panicking just yet. A landmark decision, an Oklahoma judge finding Johnson & Johnson liable in that state's opioid crisis. It's been ordered to pay more than $570 million in fines, but the stock is up. Find out why in a moment. And trouble in the skies. Boeing facing its first customer lawsuit over its grounded 737 MAX jet fleet. And nuclear deal 2.0, President Trump signaling a willingness to sit down with Iran to possibly hammer out a new deal. It's Tuesday, August 27th, and Worldwide Exchange begins right now. I'm Courtney Reagan in for Brian Sullivan here this morning. We're keeping an eye on shares of Johnson & Johnson. You can see up just about 2% in early trading here as an Oklahoma judge finds the company liable in that state's widespread opioid crisis. We're going to update you on the story in a moment because it might be surprising as to those shares being up when they were indeed found liable. Let's get a quick check on futures, though, first, to sort of set the tone for where we're starting the morning here, at least in the United States. Dow Jones futures are indicated lower by just about 26 points after we had a nice day yesterday, so all three major averages indicated to open slightly lower. Take a quick check on what's going on in the Treasury market with the yields. We watch, of course, the 2 and the 10-year very closely, and right now the 10-year yield is at 1.51. Look at this, though, 2-year 1.526. Let's go worldwide now. Let's check on what's going on in Asia. We had a mostly higher session, as you can see. The Shanghai Composite higher by 1.3%. The Nikkei higher by about 1%. And then in Europe, at least in early trading, things are looking largely red here. You can see that the FTSE 100 down by 0.5% here. Germany just about flat, though. Spain higher by 0.1%, and Italy higher by 0.7%. Now, President Trump is back at the White House following a turbulent G7 summit in France, discussing everything from a possible resumption of trade talks with China to a new nuclear deal with Iran. NBC's Craig Boswell joins us now from Washington with more. Good morning, Craig.
Courtney, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Yes, the G7 summit was ending. President Trump signaling a possible beginning to talks with Iran, saying he's open to possible nuclear talks with Iran, coming back to the table. The president saying the tensions have really flared with Iran and Tehran since over their nuclear program, the shooting down of an unmanned U.S. drone. Although Iran, Courtney, has already responded this morning, shortly after the president arrived back in Washington late last night. Iran responding this morning, saying any talks between the U.S. and Iran would only take place after the U.S. lifts sanctions on Iran. Now, on other positive notes that the president struck during this G7 meeting, this G7 economic summit, this 3 days, the president saying, in his words, that China wants to make a deal very badly, saying that Chinese officials had contacted their counterparts here in Washington a couple of times, the president says, but China is denying that those calls have taken place. The president saying that China wants to make a deal, even though both countries have threatened tariffs to begin as early as next week. So it remains to be seen whether or not these talks will ramp up, even though there are previously scheduled talks earlier this coming up in September. Now, before leaving the summit, the president signaling that he might want to host next year's summit, which is supposed to take place here in the U.S. He might want to host that at his property just outside of Miami. That raising some eyebrows. Certainly his critics saying that they would want to push back against that, and you might see even more lawsuits against any potential payments to Trump properties. Courtney, back to you.
I can see that being a bit controversial. Craig, thank you very much for joining us here this morning. Well, despite optimism yesterday of a cooling U.S.-China trade tension front, Wall Street remains on edge, warning clients about elevated recession risks and market dangers amid the uncertainty surrounding trade and a looming global slowdown. In a note to clients, Morgan Stanley says the global economy would fall into recession if the U.S. raises tariffs on all imports from China to 25% and Beijing follows suit. From the note, quote, trade tensions combined with reactive monetary and fiscal policy mean that the risk of non-linear tightening in financial conditions triggering a global recession is high and rising. At the same time, the world's top wealth manager, UBS, which oversees some $2 trillion in assets, is now recommending customers move to an underweight equities position. Quote, with talks between the U.S. and China dominating market moves over the near term, investors should brace for higher volatility. As a result, we are reducing risk in our portfolios by moving to an underweight in equities. And at RBC, they are pinning their equity outlook not just on macro tensions, but earnings growth as well. While our base case has been for a pullback of around 10% in the months ahead, we do believe the risk of a growth scare taking hold of the U.S. equity market is rising rapidly. But it's not all doom and gloom. Kevin Johnson, the CEO of Starbucks, a company with huge exposure to not just China, but around the world, isn't worried about a recession just yet, speaking with Jim Cramer on Mad Money last night.
We have not seen signs of, in the U.S. of anything related to a slowdown, but we do know these things go in cycles. But right now, we're firing on all cylinders, and consumers seem to be doing well.
Consumer is the one thing that seems to be holding up this economy, at least for now. Now on to a developing story this morning. A major court ruling in Oklahoma against Johnson & Johnson over the company's role in the state's opioid crisis. Contessa Brewer is here now with the details. Good morning, Contessa.
Good morning, Courtney. Yeah, a judge has ordered Johnson & Johnson to pay $572 million for contributing to the opioid epidemic in Oklahoma. They filed this lawsuit under the public nuisance law. The company sold 2 opioid drugs and through subsidiaries, the raw opium to manufacture prescription drugs. The ruling says J&J and its subsidiary Janssen repeatedly downplayed the risks of addiction, targeted doctors who prescribed lots of opioids as key customers. The $572 million judgment covers what the state says it will spend to tackle the crisis, including treatment and education for 1 year. That was much less than what the state had been seeking, though. Analysts had expected J&J to be fined as much as $5 billion. The stock is up about 2% this morning, in part probably because this was priced in already, the danger of a $5 billion judgment. Shares of other makers of opioids, Mallinckrodt, Teva Pharmaceuticals, and Endo are also trading higher this morning. As you can see, Teva's up 3.5%. Endo's up 4%. Johnson & Johnson plans to appeal, saying the decision is flawed and that the state failed to present evidence that its products or actions caused the crisis. The trial had been closely watched by plaintiffs in nearly 2,000 cases against J&J and other opioid manufacturers. Those have been consolidated into one case pending before a federal judge in Ohio. Oklahoma had settled suits against Purdue Pharma and Teva. Courtney.
Thank you very much, Contessa. This is a big talker, and the story is far from over. True. Appreciate you being here with us today. Well, when we come back, why renewed hopes of U.S.-China trade talks may not be enough to juice the markets this morning. Then Boeing facing its first customer lawsuit over its grounded 737 MAX jet fleet. And later, why Wall Street's eating up KFC's new tie-up with Beyond Meat. It's a very busy hour still ahead when Worldwide Exchange returns.
Do you have concerns about mild memory loss related to aging?
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind and let style lead the way and give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Quays. Waterfront outlet shopping.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you free clones of your best employees. What's that? Oh, no cloning. But there are online skills tests.
Using Indeed skills tests reduces time to hire by 27% on average. Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to Worldwide Exchange. There you have a shot of Hong Kong. China's foreign ministry out with a new statement this morning on the ongoing negotiations between the U.S. and China, clarifying news yesterday of 2 phone calls between the president and China. Our own Eunice Yoon joins us now from Beijing. Eunice, help clear up the confusion.
Well, I don't know if this is going to add to the confusion, Courtney, but the foreign ministry today declined to confirm for a second day that there were any high-level phone conversations between the U.S. and China. This, of course, comes after President Trump had said that China had called the U.S. to restart the talks. Now, the foreign ministry said that the 2 teams are in contact, and it also added that the trade dispute should be resolved through dialogue. The U.S. needs to, quote, stop all wrongful actions, and that the U.S. should create conditions for talks based on mutual respect and equality. So there are 2 ways to interpret the ministry's remarks. First, from the very beginning, the Chinese have been trying to showcase themselves as the one who are reacting, that the Trump administration is the instigator in this trade war. So because of that, we could be seeing Beijing trying to play down the idea that perhaps it initiated a call. The other way to interpret it is in the language of the statement, which has been boilerplate, and it's the same language that we've seen in some iterations since the talks stalemated since May. So the signal that Beijing is sending from the statement is that their position, at least officially, has not changed. And that would suggest then that any optimism or excitement over a possible trade deal could be a bit premature. Courtney?
Wow. So still a lot of things to clear up there and to understand. Well, what about what's going on in Hong Kong right now, Eunice? It looks like these protests have taken a decidedly violent turn over the last 24 hours or so.
Yeah, that's right. And what's interesting is that the Public Security Ministry, which of course is like the top level police dog of the country, has put out a statement saying that their minister today has been touring around Guangdong province, which is the province that borders Hong Kong. And in that statement, the ministry said that China would rigorously crack down on all subversive and terrorism activities to ensure the stability of the country. So what's interesting here is that the government has been trying to paint the protesters as terrorists. And as you had said, these protests have been becoming much more violent. The demonstrators have said that they're going to continue their protests in the coming days and weeks ahead. And so what we could be seeing here is just another reminder of the government's might here and what could happen if the protests get even more out of hand. Courtney?
Thank you very much, Eunice, for following all of that for us. I think that story is also far from over. Well, for more on the trade tensions and the markets, joining me now is RBC Capital Markets global macro strategist, Peter Shafrick. Peter, good morning. Thank you for being here with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. So we've had quite an interesting several days, right? Friday was quite a head turner. It seemed like every new headline moved the markets in a major direction, and the focus shifted from Powell, of course, to the U.S.-China trade tensions. Things seemed to calm down yesterday during the G7, at least for the markets. Where are we today? And if you're an investor, should you be as reactionary as we've been?
Well, first of all, where are we? That's a very good question. And I think nobody's really sure anymore. When you think about, you just mentioned it, we came from your president threatening further tariffs to having second thoughts, and now apparently reopening negotiations, which the Chinese don't really know about. So it's entirely unclear. So should the investors be that reactionary? I'm not quite sure it's really the end investors that are driving this. I think there's quite a lot of other participants in the market that react much quicker to headlines. But one of the things that you definitely see, I think, and you see it particularly in the bond market, not so much in the equity market, but particularly in the bond market, is the anticipation of these frictions to not go away that quickly, and therefore ultimately having an impact on the economy. I think they're very clearly visible.
Yeah, as of right now, the 2-year yield is yielding more than the 10-year at this very moment at 1.52%. So there is a fear in the bond market. And of course, we talk a lot about this yield curve inversion, often preceding a recession. Are you fearful that a recession is in the near term for the United States or perhaps other global economies?
Well, first of all, I think we should be separating the U.S. and probably the entire North American continent from the rest of the world, because I think there are very different features here. And when you say, are we fearing a recession, I think fearful is probably a too strong a word. We're certainly mindful of these risks, although we think particularly for North America, it's not imminent at all. However, when you look at other parts of the world, particularly our part here in Europe, there's certainly, our growth rates are much lower to begin with. The largest economy on the continent of Europe is now flirting with at least recessionary tendencies. The labor market is weakening to some degree, and we have the domestic event of Brexit to contend with. So I think there's a much larger risk over here of at least a pronounced downswing in the economy. That risk is very clear.
So we're talking a lot about risks, uncertainty, worries. If you put it all together, Peter, for an investor, what should you be doing? UBS is recommending basically that investors trim positions and go underweight equities.
Well, going underweight equities is a risky bet at this stage, because when you see, particularly in North America, that interest rates potentially could come further down. If the economy takes a hit, the interest rates could come further down. And what we do know is that in the early stages, typically, of these economic downswings, when interest rates come down, the equity market does reasonably well, because, of course, the discount function goes down, and therefore the multipliers can still remain relatively elevated. And I think that's what we're seeing currently. So I think my recommendation currently would be to, at the very least, have a sizable proportion still in relatively low-yielding bond markets, I'm afraid.
Okay, we'll take that under advisement. Peter Shafrick, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, still on deck, the ingredients may be fresh, but the financials, not so much. Details behind Papa John's C-suite shakeup coming up next. And later, booking your next flight via text message, not as crazy as it sounds, at least for one budget airline. It's trending, and it's coming up when Worldwide Exchange returns.
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
You're in charge of hiring and Indeed has solutions, like sponsored jobs, which increase the visibility of your post in search results to make sure the right candidates find you faster. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are sponsored jobs.
Sponsored jobs receive up to 5 times more clicks than normal job posts. Visit Indeed.com/redeem today and get a free sponsored job upgrade on your first posting. Terms, conditions and exclusions apply.
With a welcome bonus from the no annual fee British Airways American Express credit card, your next getaway's not far away. So whether it's welcome to drifting down the canals of Amsterdam or bienvenue to midnight strolls in Paris, say welcome to a European adventure. Spend £1,000 in your first 3 months of card membership and get 5,000 bonus Avios. That's enough to get away to Europe sooner. Search BA Amex to find out more. Representative 22.9% APR variable. Applicants must be 18 years or older, subject to approval. Terms, taxes, fees and carrier charges apply.
With Rapid Insurance on Vodafone Business, we'll get a replacement phone to you within 4 hours. So if you should... Oh, no. Or even... Just get in touch and we'll...
Your replacement phone, sir.
Your phone replaced within 4 hours with our Rapid Insurance. Available on our new and limited data plans. The future is exciting. Ready? Vodafone Business.
Max download upload speeds apply to data. Coverage may vary. Unlimited and rapid terms at vodafone.co.uk/terms.
Let's get a check on some of the stocks on the move this early morning. Russian firm Rostec has confirmed its air leasing business has filed a lawsuit to cancel an order for 35 Boeing 737 MAX jets. The Financial Times reported Avia Capital Services wants its $35 million deposit back, plus $75 million in lost profit, more than $100 million in compensatory damages, and several times that amount in punitive damages. Boeing so far has declined to comment, shares just about flat. Papa John's is reportedly set to name Arby's president Rob Lynch as its new CEO as soon as today. Lynch would replace Steve Ritchie, who took over early last year following a bitter board dispute with founder John Schnatter. The move also comes after activist investor Starboard Value has pushed for change. Shares of Papa John's are unchanged on this news at this point. Beyond Meat, though, up again today after the stock surged more than 5% yesterday. That's on news it's partnering with Yum Brands to test plant-based chicken nuggets and boneless wings at one KFC location in Atlanta. Shares of Beyond Meat higher by 2%. Well, still to come, out of steam. Stock futures pointing to a lower open on Wall Street. Oh, nope, look at that. We're higher. Look how quickly things change. Wall Street, despite cooling trade tensions. Our next guest says it's not the time to get negative on stocks. But first, a wild weather warning as hurricane season heats up. Worldwide Exchange is back after this.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore, and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike, and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet, and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind, and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Keys. Waterfront outlet shopping.
Did you know Currys PC World do business? Saving your business up to 30% with mega deals on computers and printers, electricals, large screen TVs, and even more. Top brands like HP, Microsoft, Epson, Sony. And if you find it cheaper from any major retailer, we'll match it. Get these deals before they're gone. Must end soon. Visit your nearest store or pcworldbusiness.co.uk/megadeals. T's and C's apply. Excludes Inc. and third-party sellers. Visit website for price promise details. Claim within 7 days.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like sponsored jobs, which increase the visibility of your post in search results to make sure the right candidates find you faster. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are sponsored jobs.
Sponsored jobs receive up to 5 times more clicks than normal job posts. Visit Indeed.com/redeem today and get a free sponsored job upgrade on your first posting. Terms, conditions and exclusions apply.
I didn't choose you, you chose me. When you broke from the crowd and pawed at my knee, soon you'll be feeling right at home. You'll be a bit unsure, but you're free to roam. What's good to chew? What's nice to nibble? Wet food, dry food, tin food, kibble? You might sometimes be cheeky, not always wise, but I know I found love in those puppy dog eyes. Join the free VIP Puppy Club from Pets at Home for advice and exclusive offers, including 10% off your first shop in store. Visit petsathome.com/puppy club or join in store. T's and C's apply.
Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things. Strings and things and strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings, strings, strings and things. Strings and
Now there's a whole range of strings and things called strings and things, including cheese strings, yollies, and new cheese shapes. Find them all in the cheese and yogurt aisle.
strings and things.
Welcome back to Worldwide Exchange. I am Courtney Reagan. Let's get a quick check on futures here. We have now turned slightly positive. The Dow Jones Industrial Average indicated higher by about 29 points. The S&P 500 just about flat to slightly higher, and the Nasdaq indicated higher by only 2 points. We got a long way to go till 9:30, but hey, things look a little greener than they did earlier at this hour. Let's get a quick check on what's going on in the energy market. You can see the price of WTI crude is higher by about 1%. Brent crude higher by about 0.6%. WTI sitting at just over $54 a barrel. Let's get a quick check this morning on the other headlines. NBC's Philip Mena is in New York with the latest. Good morning, Philip.
Hi, Courtney. Good morning. As Tropical Storm Dorian approaches, Puerto Rico has declared a state of emergency. Overnight, Dorian passed nearby the island of Barbados, and if it continues as predicted, it's expected to hit Puerto Rico tomorrow. The island is still recovering from Hurricane Maria, which made landfall nearly 2 years ago. Maria was the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history, killing nearly 3,000 people and destroying the island's power grid. Now people there are stocking up on water, food, and backup generators. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg isn't letting a cancer scare slow her down. The justice making her first public appearance since receiving treatment for a malignant tumor on her pancreas. Ginsburg accepted an honorary law degree from the University of Buffalo School of Law and cracking a few jokes along the way.
It was beyond my wildest imagination that I would one day become the notorious RPG. I am now 86 years old, yet people of all ages want to take their picture with me. Amazing.
Justice Ginsburg also said she hopes Democrats and Republicans can come together to serve the people. And Saturday Night Live has announced this season's first host, and it looks like a killer lineup. It all starts with Woody Harrelson, but fans are especially excited to see Eddie Murphy coming back to host for the first time in 35 years. So hopefully, Courtney, he'll bring back Gumby or Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood or any of his famous characters throughout the years. It's been quite a while.
It has been. I think he's slated to do the Christmas show, too, which is sort of extra exciting.
Yep,
Thank
right.
you, Philip. Well, when we come back, we go back to France, where the G7 summit has wrapped, but questions about what exactly was accomplished still remain. We're breaking down the headlines and what they mean for your money. That's coming up next here on Worldwide Exchange.
The first survivor of Alzheimer's disease.
They say less is more. But at MG, we say more is more. That means more spec than ever in the value-packed MG3, including a reverse parking camera and LED daytime running lights to bring your journey to life. MG3, big on spec, skinny on price. From just $9,495 on the road, including a 7-year, 80,000-mile warranty. Make Tuesday your MG3 test drive day at WLMG Marylebone. MG, color the road. Specifications subject to model.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind and let style lead the way and give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Quays. Waterfront outlet shopping.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like sponsored jobs, which increase the visibility of your post in search results to make sure the right candidates find you faster. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey.
A landmark ruling. Johnson & Johnson ordered to pay $572 million in a key opioid trial, but the stock's reaction may surprise you. And a big bond stumble. The three biggest names in the world of bond investing are using the same strategy, getting the same result. But in this case, it's actually not a good thing. We'll tell you why they're not worried. It's Tuesday, August 27th, and you're watching Worldwide Exchange on CNBC. I am Courtney Reagan in for Brian Sullivan this morning. Let's get a quick check on how things are shaping up to set up your market day. Futures right now are pointing to a slightly positive to mixed open. As you can see, the NASDAQ going back and forth between positive and negative. The Dow just ever so slightly positive here. Take a quick look at what's going on in the Treasury market as we watch this bond inversion for the 2-year yield sitting slightly above the yield on the 10-year note. And let's go worldwide and get a check on what happened overseas in Asia. You can see the Shanghai Composite up more than 1.3%. The Japanese Nikkei also adding a percent. And in Europe, in early trading, we had a mixed picture about a half an hour ago. And so far, I believe that is still the case as we're looking right now at the German DAX at just barely positive. The FTSE MIB there in Italy is higher by 0.3%, but the FTSE 100 is lower by 0.3%. And President Trump is back at the White House after a headline-grabbing G7 summit in France, to say the least. Eamon Javers joins us live from the scene. Bonjour, Eamon.
Bonjour, Courtney. Good morning from Saint-Jean-de-Luz here in France. The diplomats have gone, the world leaders have gone, the tourists and the beachgoers are still here in this seaside town today. Let's take a look at sort of what we learned here at this G7. A very dramatic and different G7 as we saw all the world leaders meeting in Biarritz. Last year's G7 in Canada ended in frustration, the president tweeting insults at the hosts, flying away in Air Force One in a funk. This time, the president flew away and said, "Thank you, France. a much more upbeat tone overall to the G7 here. A couple of points to watch. All the diplomacy was relatively subtle here. No major agreements signed, no pens to paper. But on China trade, we saw a president of the United States yesterday who was much more engaged in deal-making mode than he had been on Friday. Earlier in the week, the president very frustrated, calling the leader of China an enemy. On Monday, though, calling him a great leader, seemingly willing to work it out with the Chinese. We'll see whether the Chinese are also willing. On Iran, a bit of a thaw here. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, going out of his way to engage the Iranian leadership, to bring the foreign minister of Iran here to Biarritz to talk to world leaders. The president of the United States offering loans to Iran secured by oil if they can get to an agreement, suggesting that he'd be willing to sit down with Hassan Rouhani of Iran if the timing was right, ultimately. And then finally, the Russia reset. Vladimir Putin, a big subject, not present in Biarritz, but a big subject of discussion here in Biarritz as all the world leaders discussed and debated the president's proposal to make the G7 the G8 again and bring Russia back in. You remember Russia was expelled from the G8, what was then the G8, for its annexation of Crimea. The president suggested that was because Vladimir Putin simply outsmarted Barack Obama. He'd like to bring Vladimir Putin back in and make the G7 the G8 again. Other world leaders not so keen on that idea, but nonetheless, the president trying to present a bit of a Russia reset there as well, Courtney. So a lot going on, subtle diplomacy, no major deals, but positive signs from various fronts.
It was enough to keep you busy, I think, Eamon. We're also getting new comments this morning from China on those trade talks. What do we know now?
Well, what we know is that the Chinese have never said over the past 24 hours whether or not there were these telephone calls at a high level that President Trump talked about yesterday. You remember, he rocked the markets in the futures early Monday by suggesting that there had been 2 phone calls with the Chinese side and that the Chinese had indicated they were ready to come back to the table. The Chinese government never endorsed that, never said that that happened. They're saying they want the United States to stop its so-called wrong actions, and then they can get back to the negotiating table. But no word from the Chinese whether these phone calls actually happened. At one point yesterday, the president sort of dropped that claim and suggested that it was a headline from some of the Chinese leadership that he was referring to, and then went back to the idea that there had been numerous phone calls. We never quite got to the bottom of that, Courtney, and nobody on the U.S. side offered any details of the calls, timing, who they were with, or anything like that. The president asserts they happened. The Chinese say we don't have any record of that.
So we're still not sure. But thank you for following all those twists and turns for us, Eamon Jowers. Well, here to discuss is Tony Fratto of Hamilton Place Strategies, also a former White House Deputy Press Secretary, and John Rutledge of Safanand. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here today. John, I'll have to start with you, since we just sort of ended with Eamon talking about what we know or maybe what we don't between these conversations with the U.S. and China. As you look at China, what do you think they are looking at the United States negotiating position? Do you think that they think we're weak, strong? Where are they playing their hand in regards to where we sit?
Well, remember, this is a place that's been around for 4,000 years. So they think of American presidents as temporary occupants of the White House, the same way Douglas MacArthur did. But in China, as much as early as a year, even 2 years ago, the people on the ground were really thinking this is more of a long-term conflict arising between China and the U.S., because China is growing of size to be a direct competitor to the U.S. in the world, not only trade, but also foreign policy and other things. So that's why supply chains started moving as early as a year ago. But they are not hopeful that there's going to be any immediate resolution. And the confusing remarks that come out of the White House in these tweet storms really make it much more difficult inside China for them to figure out what's going on.
And Tony, I think the markets, too, are also very confused. Obviously, we're down one day sharply, we're up the next. President Trump seems to be able to move the market very swiftly with tweets, whether or not the information is able to be verified, which seems to be a dangerous position for investors. What do you make of putting all this together, and how really investors should be reacting to all of the news and headlines?
Yeah, I think it must be bewildering for them. I mean, you had some reporting, Courtney, at the top of the hour about some of the banks and what they're telling their clients about taking risk off and being a little bit more cautionary. I think that's probably the right stance. And we tell our clients who are asking what they should make of it is to focus much more on what is actually happening and less on what the president and others are saying is going to happen, because we've been down this road multiple times now with the administration indicating that things are very close, then things are off. We've heard this not just in the past few weeks, but in the past few days going into the weekend. It sounded like things were really rocky, and then who knows, maybe some accommodation yesterday. What we do know is that tariffs are still in place. New tariffs are coming on. New tariffs are coming on in December, and we know that the Chinese and the Americans are going to sit down and talk in September, regardless of whether it was a result of phone calls or not. We know that there's going to be some sit down, and so we'll see if anything concrete comes out of those discussions.
John, on Friday morning, China came out and retaliated against the United States' action with tariffs of its own on U.S. products. How damaging is that action, and what other measures should we be prepared for in terms of retaliation from China?
Well, people notice, Courtney, that the retaliation is smaller numbers than the U.S. tariffs. That's because China has less to work with on that score. The reason their exports, or our exports to them, are small in part is because many U.S. companies are located inside China, doing business, producing there for the growing middle class of China. So in addition to tariffs, I think much more dangerous for U.S. companies is the policies the Chinese government has toward them on the ground in China. They can cause tremendous damage to U.S. companies, so we should be careful about that. But the other damage, of course, is that as a director of companies, I think I'm on 6 or 7 boards at the moment, I cannot approve a major capital spending project with this level of uncertainty. Capital spending takes years and years. Just imagine how long it takes you. If you believe the president that, okay, get out of China, it would take a company years to do that because the capital on the ground is long-term capital. And so investment spending is just frozen in its tracks, waiting for a resolution. I think Pompeo gave the game away the other day when he said, gee, this is not likely to get resolved until the next election. What he told you is this is too delicious a political asset to let go before November 2020.
That's exactly what I was kind of thinking, Tony, as I start to think about the president's messaging. Is this possibly all done together to try to get Jay Powell to cut rates, sort of drive things lower, get his rate cut that he wants, and then he ultimately solves the deal with China and says, look, I got rates lower, I solved the deal with China going into the election? Doesn't that look good?
Well, Jay Powell has essentially told him, right, that trade uncertainty is going to factor into his decisions on rate cutting by, both in terms of speed and magnitude. And so, I think on trade, the president has had this view on trade. He's been relatively, protectionist and feeling that the United States has been treated unfairly, in, his words, with our trading partner for decades. So it's not a new thing. And so I don't know that it would have made any difference. He was still going to be very confrontational on trade, and it is having an economic impact. John just described the kinds of decisions that firms are making, long-term investment decisions that they have to put on hold now, have to go through very costly changes in supplier lines. The administration talks about these things as though they're things that can just happen. They're very difficult and challenging and expensive to do for companies. So there's an economic impact. And so, the Fed does need to be thinking about it. And, but he wants to see low rates for a lot of reasons. I don't rule out politics involved in that. I think he would like to see, a juiced up economy going into his election. But I think some of his motivations for things like the trade fight are, long standing with him.
Seems to all make sense to me. Tony Fratto, John Rutledge, thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks, Courtney.
Pleasure.
Well, developing story, an Oklahoma judge ruling against Johnson & Johnson in the state's opioid case, forcing the company to pay $572 million. CNBC's Meg Terrell joins us on the CNBC Newsline. Meg, you know, if folks just look at the headlines, they think that this was a victory for the courts, but others may say, actually, this was a victory for Johnson & Johnson. $572 million is not as bad as it could have been.
Hey, Cor. Yeah, if you look at the stock reaction, certainly Wall Street considers it a victory for Johnson & Johnson. It really depends on who you're talking to. You know, the Attorney General called it a victory for the state. The judge was pretty clear in his decision, saying that Johnson & Johnson was misleading in the way it marketed these opioids. Of course, it said J&J was not just a marketer of its own opioids, but it also, of course, cultivated the raw ingredients that it sold to other companies. So that's how the state made its case that Johnson & Johnson was a major contributor to the state's opioid crisis. But Wall Street was looking at potentially $1 to $2 billion and even as much as $5 billion for a judgment here. The state asked for $17 billion. It got basically what amounted to 1 year of what it calls an abatement plan to try to remedy the crisis here in the state. It was looking for $17 billion over 30, but still declaring some victory at least in what was the first case of many to potentially go to trial starting this fall.
And that was exactly what I was going to ask you next, Meg, is what precedent does this set for the remainder of the cases that may be coming to court here?
So Johnson & Johnson says no precedent, of course. They say that the legal issues at play here were unique to Oklahoma. Oklahoma was basically arguing that J&J caused what it calls a public nuisance, and the judge agreed with them in this case. Now, there are other legal issues at play in other cases, and what folks are wondering about is, does this set a tone for those? Does it encourage the companies to come to the table and potentially reach a settlement? Why you're seeing some of those stocks like Teva, Mallinckrodt, Endo, those were moving huge last night on this news. They were up double digits for some of them. Now this morning they're still up, but not nearly as much. And the same with Johnson & Johnson. It jumped more than 4% last night, and now it's up slightly less than that. It seems like analysts are kind of parsing this and saying, yes, that was less than we expected for J&J, but nobody's out of the woods. This is going to be a long legal battle, and maybe everybody shouldn't breathe such a huge sigh of relief as they were last night.
You know, I am from Ohio, as you know, Meg, and that's sort of the unfortunate epicenter of a lot of what's going on in the opioid crisis. And I have to say, when I heard the ruling, I was in a way glad that there was some responsibility for this horrible tragedy that's happening. But again, I'm just astounded by $572 million. Like you said, that's sort of 1 year worth of the damage that had been assessed in the state of Oklahoma, at least. What's to come in states like Ohio?
Ohio is the epicenter of the federal case where thousands of lawsuits from cities and counties have been consolidated into federal court in the Northern District there. So that first trial, where Cuyahoga County and Summit counties in Ohio are going to go to trial, is set for October 21st if no major settlement is reached. And the judge in that case is pushing all the parties to come to the table to try to reach a big settlement. Now, this would be huge, and there's a lot of different companies that are defendants in these cases, dozens, more than a dozen companies. So drug companies, distributors, and pharmacies are all named here. So it would be very big for them to come and reach a settlement together. Johnson & Johnson said yesterday in a statement after the decision that all options are on the table, including a potential settlement in that major case, which is interesting because in Oklahoma, they said, when you're right, you fight. But this is a whole other story in Ohio because it's thousands of cases on the federal level.
Meg Terrell, I know you're going to continue to cover this story for us. Thank you for calling in early this morning. Well, coming up, why tech plus real estate equals a recipe for investing success. We break down the two hot sectors and the names to watch. That's coming up next.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor.
There are certain things in life we simply don't talk about, and hemorrhoids are, right up there, so to speak. But we should, because there's 8 million people in the UK right now suffering with piles. If you're one of them like I was, you should speak to Xroid. They're the Harley Street specialists in hemorrhoid treatment. It's a new, fast, gentle, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids, with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Consultation and treatment starts from $9.95. Xroid, be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore, and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike, and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet, and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind, and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Quays. Waterfront outlet shopping.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
Well, let's find out what else you're going to be talking about today. It's time for this morning's top trending stories. Contessa Brewer is here. We already started talking about it.
We were talking about what defines trending. Let me tell you, Spirit Airlines wants to make it even easier to book your flight. The budget airline will begin allowing customers to reserve their seats on WhatsApp starting next month. The service will be available in English and Spanish, with customers first interacting with a chat bot to get basic information and then book their flight. The Spirit agents will be involved here, but like everything else, we're turning to automation, digital, artificial information. So pretty soon, the best friend in your life is really going to be the robot that you interact with.
This freaks me out. I'm such a fat finger texter and autocorrect.
But don't you already get, like, I fly United a lot. I get the text messages that tell me my gate has changed.
Yeah.
It just seems so much easier to me than trying to call on the phone or find the place on the website to change a flight or whatever. If you could just text an agent and say, I want to change my flight.
It could be. I just want to make sure there's some room for error because I'm inevitably going to screw that up.
Right. Delta and Airlines they're testing that out. So we'll see. This could be the trend of the future. Hey, Barbie is rolling out new dolls in its Inspiring Women series. Legendary civil rights leader Rosa Parks and the first American female astronaut Sally Ride immortalized here by Barbie. The dolls come with educational information about the achievements of both Ride and Parks. I find it interesting that when Mattel put out, we're selling these dolls, one they advertised as being at Target, Sally Ride, and the other, Rosa Parks, was at Walmart. So it seemed like each store was getting their own version, but you can buy them both from Mattel at about $30.
Although I think Rosa Parks is back ordered already.
It's amazing.
I looked it up this morning.
It's really fascinating. I wish they would do the same thing for boys. I want boys to have inspiring dolls,
like the Ken version of the Inspiring Men.
Exactly.
In American history.
Yeah, let's see a Ken version of FDR.
That'd be cool. Good idea. Look at that. Maybe you should work in business, Contessa.
Occasionally I have them. It's the whole mom thing going for me here.
I like that. I like that very much. Thank you. The two best performing sectors in the S&P 500 so far this year, technology and real estate. Actually, it's by a pretty wide margin. Dominic Chu is here with a deeper dive. Hey, Dom.
All right, so Courtney, just how big of a gap is it? If you take a look at the S&P 500 so far this year, and then you look at the two best performing sectors, the S&P 500 is up about 15%. Meanwhile, technology and real estate up 25 to 26% each. And what happens when you actually take those two sectors and put them together? What you have are companies that deal in both real estate and technology. Check out these names, because if you take a look at the overall sector, we're taking a look at some of the companies that actually do wireless technology and also server farms and data centers as well. Those types of companies are the ones who actually do better in this kind of environment. Now, if you take a look at those names, some of the ones that we're talking about are names like SBA Communications and also AMT, American Tower, and others as well. So if you take a look at all those names overall, Courtney, real estate plus technology equals some of those names that actually do really well in this kind of environment. Back over to you guys.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Dom. Well, on deck, three legendary bond masters rude awakening when it comes to their bottom lines. Worldwide Exchange is back right after this.
Sectornomics is sponsored by Sector Spider ETFs.
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere. Because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore, and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Quays. Waterfront outlet shopping.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
To watch, office sharing startup WeWork. Will the IPO oracle rated a hit or miss for investors? First on Squawk Box today.
Should you be selling stocks or selling bonds right now?
If you don't have a financial plan, this could be a call to action. Just go get yourself a plan. If you're feeling nervous, how about raising cash?
I think a lot of people who prune their portfolios at times like this, they forget to look at the tax consequences.
If you're able to tap liquidity from qualified or retirement accounts, then that's a place to go look so you don't realize capital gains on the sale of your assets.
Biggest thing people should not do?
Panic.
Panic, all right.
Time for the executive recap. The headlines you need in 60 seconds. A new report out from the Wall Street Journal on ousted Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn. Ghosn allegedly built a parallel business as an investor in Silicon Valley using millions of dollars he received from an exec at a Nissan business partner in Oman. The charges claim Ghosn stole Nissan money by arranging for it to pay an Oman distributor $10 million and having $5 million kicked back to him. Boeing facing its first lawsuit from a 737 MAX customer, a Russian aircraft leasing company suing Boeing for breach of contract in connection with its grounded 737 MAX. Jeffrey Gundlach, Dan Ivasine, and Scott Minerd, the so-called bond kings, have employed the same investing strategy and have fallen short when compared to their peers thanks to the monstrous rally in U.S. corporate bonds and treasuries. But the three all tell Reuters they're not worried, saying they can live with the underperformance because of the greater damage they see coming for corporate bonds. Well, back to the markets and your money. Futures are indicating a mixed open, or they were at least just a bit ago. We had been negative, then slightly positive. Joining me now is Bill Stone. He is the Chief Investment Officer at Avalon Investment and Advisory. Bill, thank you for being here with us today. There is so much headline whiplash with the latest trade headlines between the United States and China. Is it dangerous to get involved in the equity markets right now? Would you recommend sitting on the sidelines or taking money out as UBS is telling clients to do?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't totally take money out. You know, we've talked to clients about the fact that you just have to expect volatility at this point. I think, clearly, Friday made it clear, and even again yesterday, that the trade headlines are what really is mattering to the market right now. I was thinking about it, and I said, wow, it reminds me of this book I read a long time ago, The Agony and the Ecstasy. It was about Michelangelo. I don't know how I can twist that into it, other than Italy is somehow, involved in this too with their coalition government in trouble. But at the end of the day, I do think you have to look through to the longer run. We are going to continue to have, and I think, I don't know how long it'll take to get through the volatility, but to leave completely out of equities, that really comes to making two good decisions. That's really hard to do in terms of that decision to get back in. I think you get yourself to a place where you can make it through the short-term bumps that we may have, because long-term, I still would say the opportunities are greater in stocks. You just have to look as far as the fact that the dividend yield on the S&P is higher than the 10-year. Historically, that's been good. It doesn't work right away necessarily, but at least since the financial crisis, that's been a good signal that things have gotten cheap enough that some money starts going there.
We just have about a minute left here, Bill. I mean, do you think that rate cuts are going to be enough to sort of offset any other weakness that we see from trade? It seems like the market is definitely pricing in a 25 basis point rate cut here coming up. Could we get more, and is it enough?
Yeah, I think yes to the 25 basis points at least. I think depending on how the data comes out, you might get 50 in September. Our base case is 25, but I think you're going to get probably another 2 cuts, add up to a total of another 75 basis points. I think that's what the yield curve is telling you. Mm-hmm. Is it enough? Well, I think clearly the central bank's trying to offset the trade drag. It may not completely be able to, but I do think it'll be a help, and that's why you're seeing central banks across the globe really cutting. I still think it's going to keep the U.S. out of recession here, at least for the next year anyway.
Okay, keeping us out of recession would be a good thing. I hope that prophecy comes true for us. That is it for Worldwide Exchange this morning. Squawk Box begins right now.
Good morning. A landmark ruling in a court about an opioid case. Johnson & Johnson ordered to pay more than $500 million. We'll tell you why drug maker stocks, though, are pushing higher. What recession? The CEO of a major consumer company tells CNBC he sees no signs of a slowdown in growth. Plus, the latest response from China to President Trump in the trade war. We'll get a live report from Beijing. It's Tuesday, August 27th, 2019, and Squawk Box begins right now.
Live from New York, where business never sleeps, this is Squawk Box.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Mike Santoli. Andrew's off today. We've been watching the U.S. equity futures, and you're going to see right now that things are in the green. We did see gains yesterday. Dow was up more than 230 points, made some progress, but didn't make back even half of the ground that we had lost on Friday. This morning, though, green arrows right now. S&P futures indicated up by about 3, and the NASDAQ up by about 7. Overnight in Asia, take a look, and you're going to see that the Nikkei actually ended the day up by about 1%. The Hang Seng was flat. Shanghai Composite up by about 1 1/3%. And then in Europe, where there's already some early trading that's taking place right now, you will see that it's a mixed picture. A little weaker for the FTSE, down by about 0.4%. The CAC is flat, and the DAX up by just over 0.1%. When you check out Treasury yields, this morning we're taking a look at the 10-year, and you'll see that it's trading at 1.5%, 1.503% to be precise. The 2-year a little higher than that in terms of the yield, 1.518%, and then the 30-year back below 2% at 1.991.
This is no way to run a business, obviously. I'm talking about tort reform, things like that. I mean, when one judge can say, yes, $17 billion, I mean, you wonder.
Well, he didn't.
No, he didn't, but he could have. Yeah. That's the specter that we deal with in today's, with trial lawyers. Now to get to a developing story this morning, I got my editorializing out even before I said what the
started, at least, maybe not out.
What the story was. Major court ruling. This is just one state, too. This is Oklahoma. We know about the opioid crisis. Anyway, it was against Johnson & Johnson over the company's role in the state's opioid crisis. A judge has ordered the company to pay $572 million for contributing to the opioid epidemic in Oklahoma under its public nuisance law. There's 50 states, by the way.
Well, it's not just states. There are also municipalities that are suing.
Well, think about it. The ruling says J&J and its unit, Janssen, repeatedly downplayed the risks of addiction, training sales representatives to tell doctors that the risks were lower if they prescribed the drugs. Doctors who prescribed a high amount of opioids were targeted as key customers. The $572 million judgment covers 1 year of abatement of costs to tackle the crisis through addiction treatment and overdose prevention programs, but the number that people were worried about was $17 billion, $500 billion versus 17. It had been seeking analysts had been seeking between 500 million and 5 billion, and shares of other opioids, Mallinckrodt, Teva, and Endo are also trading higher. What was the $17 billion?
The $17 billion was for 30 years. They thought it would take 30 years to fight and turn around what has happened with the opioid crisis. The judge said, no, you can have 1 year of abatement, but not 30.
And I think the estimates going into the ruling were that perhaps it would be about $1.5 billion to $2 billion. I think analysts were handicapping
this
something
definitely
like that,
came in on the low
which
side.
is why J&J shares are getting a little bit of a bump today because it was not as bad as some were bracing for.
Johnson & Johnson has been the one that dug in its heels and said, we're not going to settle. We're going to fight this.
Baby powder, and then I see ads, when I'm watching for Roundup constantly on there. So there's a lot of...
Well, that's Bayer's problem now. Monsanto.
Yeah, Johnson & Johnson will appeal, plans to appeal, saying the decision is flawed, and the state failed to present evidence that its products or actions caused the crisis. The trial had been closely watched by plaintiffs in nearly 2,000 cases against J&J and other opioid manufacturers. Those have been consolidated into one case, which we see a lot, which is pending before a federal judge. In this case, it's in Ohio. We'll get a live report from Oklahoma later this hour.
President Trump has returned from the G7 summit in France, and his takeaway message from the newsy and memorable meeting, flawless unity. Eamon Javers is getting ready to return home. Eamon, what would you say in terms of how you wrap all of this up?
Yeah, Becky, look, this was a much different G7 than we saw last year in Canada. You remember that one ended in frustration. The president tweeting angrily on the airplane on the way out. This time, that flawless unity message, the president tweeting, thank you, France, on the way out the door. This was a president of the United States who was here in France in deal-making mode. Such a contrast between what we saw from the president on Friday to what we saw from him on Monday. The president went out of his way to suggest that he was willing to negotiate with the Chinese and to suggest that the Chinese were willing to negotiate with him. We went a little bit around and around yesterday on this issue of phone calls, never quite got to the bottom of that, but nonetheless, the president sending positive signals to the market and to the Chinese government that he's ready to get back to serious negotiating. The Chinese have sent another signal back to the United States today saying they'd like the U.S. to stop its, quote, wrong actions before they get down to negotiating. But the rhetoric continues to improve on that from where we were on Friday. On the Iran issue, another bit of a thaw perhaps there. The president signaling that he'd be willing to meet with Hassan Rouhani, the leader of Iran, even as the foreign minister of Iran was actually here in France during this session. The president putting out the idea that he's willing to float some loans to the Iranians for lines of credit secured by Iranian oil to get them back on their feet economically if they do come to the negotiating table. So maybe an opening there as well. And then finally on the issue of Russia, Vladimir Putin not here in France this time, guys, but ultimately a big subject of discussion as the president wants to make the G7 the G8 again. You remember that Russia was kicked out of the G8 back in 2014 because of the annexation of Crimea. The president says that was simply Vladimir Putin outsmarting Barack Obama. He'd like Russia to be back in. Not clear that that idea met with a lot of enthusiasm from the other world leaders here in France, but nonetheless, the president in deal-making mode on that front as well, Becky. So a whole lot going on here, but now it's all over. The diplomats are gone, and this beach town gets back to what it does best, which is tourism and swimming.
And you're leaving.
And maybe a little shopping. We're soon, after we do some swimming and some shopping.
Okay, I won't say what I was coming next.
What's that?
Enjoy the swimming.
Then there was a suit.
Au revoir.
There was a suit, right? Swimsuit.
Swimsuit.
There was. Okay. Okay, good. Because you know what Buffett say when the tide
goes out, you see who's swimming naked.
Yeah, exactly. And he is already on record as saying that was not the case. Eamon was. President Trump has said that recession fears are overblown, and the CEO of Starbucks would agree. Kevin Johnson told Jim Cramer, that's what he said last night on Mad Money.
We have not seen signs of, in the U.S. of anything related to a slowdown, but we do know these things go in cycles. But right now, we're firing on all cylinders, and consumers seem to be doing well.
Starbucks shareholders likely share Johnson's optimism. Stock's up more than 80% over the last year. So when you, do you say take a listen, Santoli?
I try to avoid it, actually.
I cannot believe how many people say it. What does that even mean when you toss? See, folks at home, if you ever become a TV person, whenever you toss to a soundbite, it's just, if you say take a listen, you feel so anchor-like, but it's so common, it's so sad to see. I mean, good anchors that I respect say take a listen every time.
No handy way to tee up or
can't you just
signal
start
that you want to
going
have somebody.
slow?
What it is it's a signal to the control room to roll.
I know. But if you start going slow and they know it's coming, and then just stop, and then just deal with the silence there.
And go like this.
I've sometimes said,
or you can look down at the monitor.
This to say.
Yeah, you have this to say.
I've sometimes said, listen here, but that sounds like I'm about to scold.
And you're telling people that, yeah.
Order or something.
You could say, here's what he said,
really
here's what they said, or come up with something. This is interesting, whatever, but to take a listen. Anyway, 6:08.
Your turn.
My turn
to talk.
To talk again. So lucky. Coming up, new word from China overnight on the potential for new trade talks. We're going to take you live to Beijing going forward. Another one. And then later, the analyst whose scores have predicted some recent IPO stumbles will reveal his grade for the WeWork IPO. You can only see it on Squawk Box. As we head to break, here's a look at some of the biggest pre-market.
This CNBC.
There are certain things in life we simply don't talk about. And hemorrhoids are, right up there, so to speak. But we should, because there's 8 million people in the UK right now suffering with piles. If you're one of them like I was, you should speak to Xroid. They're the Harley Street specialists in hemorrhoid treatment. It's a new, fast, gentle, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids, with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Consultation and treatment starts from $9.95. Xroid, be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore, and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Quays. Waterfront outlet shopping.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
You're in charge of hiring and Indeed has solutions, like our library of job description templates which are free and easy to customize. We also give you the pigeon of perception, who only coos when you find the perfect CV. Or when he's hungry. Okay, no pigeon then, but there are free job descriptions.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/start today to use our library of completely free job description templates. Terms and conditions apply.
At Tesco, we can pop our pasta in your Astra, our red Leicester in your Fiesta, or our mayo in your Mondeo. All you need to do is try Click and Collect. Just go to Tesco.com, order your shopping, then click and collect. With the minimum basket spend now only £25. And if you fancy something a little more exotic, we can even put our pad thai in your Qashqai. Try Click and Collect at Tesco.com. Every little helps. Selected larger stores. Booking charge may apply. See online for full terms and conditions.
China's foreign ministry out with a new statement this morning on the ongoing negotiations between the United States and China, clarifying news yesterday of 2 phone calls between the president and China. Eunice Yoon joins us from Beijing and has more on this story. And Eunice, it's good to see you.
Thanks so much, Becky. Well, the foreign ministry declined to comment and declined to confirm for a second day that the two sides held high-level phone conversations between the trade negotiators. The foreign ministry said that the two teams were in contact. And it also added that the trade dispute should be resolved through dialogue. The U.S. needs to stop all wrongful actions, and the U.S. should create conditions to talks based on mutual respect and equality. So there are two ways really to interpret the ministry's remarks. First, from the very beginning, China has been trying to paint itself as the one that is responding to the trade war, that the U.S. is the one that's the instigator. And so what we could be seeing is Beijing trying to show that it didn't initiate this phone call, even if it did. And then the other point, and that's really important in the statement, is the message in the language of the text. So this is all very boilerplate and basically a tweak, very similar since from the language that's been used since the talks stalemated back in May. And so the message and the takeaway is that Beijing officially isn't changing its position on the trade talk. So that really suggests that any optimism that you could feel about the trade talks could be a bit premature. But I also want to give you guys one positive story about the U.S.-China relationship, and that is that Costco opened its first store today in Shanghai. And this opening has been all over social media because the store had to close early. It was so crowded with traffic lining out the door by 1 kilometer. I don't know if that's normal in the United States, but it's been getting a lot of attention here. It's been a major talking point, and people have been saying that, hey, maybe the U.S. and China relationship isn't so bad because Chinese consumers love discounts and the bargains that they're getting at Costco. And particularly popular, the muffins. So I've never had a muffin at Costco, but apparently they're really, really popular here.
Their cakes are really good. I've never had a muffin from there.
Are they? Yeah, but people like them a lot. I thought, wow, at least there's a good story there. The Chinese consumer is loving this American product.
We can mend all fences as long as we have good pastries, right?
Yeah, Eunice, I was feeling very half full yesterday, thinking about, how did it get to this point with China, and then thinking, I mean, in a perfect world, both countries have so much to gain, and I almost felt like a globalist, and I didn't really start liking that feeling. But you've got, two. I didn't, but it could be really good with what we could do together, and it doesn't have to be a zero sum, a win loss. It just seems like it could be a symbiotic relationship where both parties benefit, and I'm hoping that that's where we finally get it in the end.
Yeah. I think that I think the Chinese government would agree with you. They definitely would want to see a win-win situation between the two sides, especially because they know that Chinese consumers do like a lot of these products from the United States. But yeah, it's difficult because, I mean, now I'm going to play your role, but because over years and years, there have been so many complaints that the Chinese have been taking control or taking advantage of the global system. And the Chinese would say that they didn't. But, these are some of the issues that need to be worked out. Why are we changing our hats? You're supposed to be the one who's...
I know. I was just thinking it would be nice. But then I thought
about...
but then I felt like what you were just saying again. It's like, well, yeah, it's easy to want to be a win-win when you've been stealing stuff for like 40 years. But then they would think that we're trying to...
Oh, thank God, Joe. Now I feel much more comfortable with you and your role.
Yeah, okay. I'm back to but then I'm thinking they felt like that was necessary and even justified by the roles in the world of the two countries. And when you're trying to catch up, I don't know. Maybe someday it will be not quite as awful as it is right now, Eunice, hopefully. And that's what we're hoping. Anyway, here to talk about the trade impact on the market is Catherine Rooney-Vera, Head of Global Research and Chief Investment Strategist at Bulltick Capital Markets. And here on set is Daryl Cronk, Chief Investment Officer of Wells Fargo Wealth and Investment Management. Daryl, I'll get to you in a second, Catherine, but I was looking at some of Daryl's stuff. So it's crazy because in August, as you point out, how many days 1% moves. It's thin, and there's a vacuum in some other areas of the news cycle. So a lot has been happening. Is it noise, or can we derive something from the future action that we're expecting?
No, I don't think it's noise at all. I mean, it's 19 straight days that the futures have 1% plus or minus 1% pre-market. So there's a lot of volatility there in thin markets. I think it's real, actionable news. I mean, the thing I worry about is when you start adding up the tariffs in aggregate, we're now just about over the top of the total fiscal stimulus for all of 2019. So we had about $125 billion worth of fiscal stimulus in 2019. The tariffs are about $110 billion right now. So we're going to basically zero out fiscal stimulus.
Well, what if you take in how much the yuan has gone down, though? And I mean, that hasn't hit us directly. The 120, it's not apples to apples.
Well, it is apples to apples in the sense it's fiscal stimulus. It's not to China. If their yuan's going down, that's insulating their exposure.
And consumers. Consumers haven't felt.
The consumer has not yet.
They hasn't lost the 100 and whatever you just said. You haven't subtracted that stimulus from the economy.
Well, it is in the economy.
Economic data in the United States. The U.S. is doing pretty well. If you look at import prices, in fact, let's look at the numbers, right? Import prices are declining. They're not even rising because of these tariffs that we've had for many months. We're 25% on 40% of imports for 6 to 9 months, and you have import prices declining, and core PCE decelerating from 1.9% in December to 1.4% currently. The U.S. consumer confidence is still extremely high, and you have not seen the flow through to inflation. In fact, if you really think about it, and this is something, Joe, that I encounter quite a bit with our clients and a lot of people that I talk with, people have the impression that when you increase an import tariff, then the equivalent impact of that import tariff is what you're paying at Walmart. That's not the case. Around approximately 20% of what we consume in this country is imported, of which approximately 20% is from China. So the numbers are pretty easy to do. The impact on the additive, ceteris paribus, which we know not everything is always equal, but the net impact on core PCE over a period of time of 1 year, Joe, is 0.9% on 25% of total tariffs. So the impact we haven't even seen in inflation, and it's not a direct impact on U.S. GDP. The U.S. economy is a consumption-based economy. The export or trade is 10% of our GDP. China, it's far more relevant. It's about a third of GDP. So certainly I'll agree with you. I think incentives are aligned, and I do think that we get to some framework terms by end of next year.
Wow. Bull tick. It's not bear tick. That's it. I
there
was
you
thinking,
go. I know you love that name, Joe.
I do, but it might be because you're in Miami too. I mean, I'm in Miami. I'm happy, right? I mean, you go out at night.
There you go.
Everybody's out. Everybody's
How can you not be?
Daryl, where you live? Like
you're in New York,
Siberia, or something. You do.
Park,
Okay.
yeah.
Bad mood. All right. Daryl, thanks. Catherine, thank you. We're gonna move on.
My pleasure,
sneeze.
Joe. Thank you.
So take it away. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, take his mic away. When we come back, bless you. New applications for artificial intelligence in the medical field.
I told you.
Talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Did you know Currys PC World do business? Saving your business up to 30% with mega deals on computers and printers, electricals, large screen TVs, and even more. Top brands like HP, Microsoft, Epson, Sony. And if you find it cheaper from any major retailer, we'll match it. Get these deals before they're gone. Must end soon. Visit your nearest store or pcworldbusiness.co.uk/megadeals. T's and C's apply. Excludes Inc. and third-party sellers. Visit website for price promise details. Claim within 7 days.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like our library of job description templates, which are free and easy to customize. We also give you the pigeon of perception. who only coos when you find the perfect CV. Or when he's hungry. Okay, no pigeon then, but there are free job descriptions.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/start today to use our library of completely free job description templates. Terms and conditions apply.
Everyone wants a smooth running home so that they can spend more time enjoying it. The British Gas app allows you to do just that, because with the touch of a finger, you can quickly submit meter readings or book an expert engineer, leaving you more time for watering the borders or a spot of sunbathing. Manage your home account and more all in one place. Download the British Gas app from the App Store or Google Play today.
London's original pop-up festival is back. Underbelly Festival South Bank, with more must-see shows than ever before. From comedy to cabaret, get your tickets from just £12 each, or simply head on down and hang out in the sunshine by the London Eye. Soak up the electric festival atmosphere at one of London's largest outdoor bars and enjoy the international street food. Open 7 days a week till late. Go to underbellyfestival.com.
First world problem number 346.
Well, you know, people might think I'm exaggerating, but since Virgin Atlantic announced their sale, I can't sleep. 1 minute my head is in New York, the next I'm searching for shows in Vegas. I can't stop. So many choices. South Africa, the Caribbean, California. My search history is a total mess. Oh, I might need to bring it up with my life coach.
Seriously? Get a flight. Bing bong. The Virgin Atlantic sale is now on. Visit virginatlantic.com and fly direct from London.
Welcome back, everybody. It's been a busy start to the week for the markets, but we're going to take a break for a very brief moment to talk about an interesting story at the intersection of health and technology. There's a new study from the Mayo Clinic released just this morning that shows how artificial intelligence can determine a person's actual physiological age, which could be years off from a person's chronological age. Joining us to talk about what this means and why doctors might treat you differently because of it is Dr. Paul Friedman. He is joining us this morning. He's the chair of the Department of Cardiovascular Medicine at the Mayo Clinic. And Doctor, thanks for being here today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, Becky.
All right. When you say physiological age versus chronological, I start thinking of, age is just a number and we're all as young as we think. Is that what it is, or is it something different?
Well, sort of. The study was really spearheaded by my colleague, Zaki Atiya and Suraj Kappa, and asked a simple but profound question. Can we use an ECG to see how old somebody is? And so we fed a number of ECGs into a computer, a neural network, and essentially the computer guesses it first. You put in an ECG and say, how old is this person? It may guess 35, you say no, 50. And doing that over hundreds of thousands of times, it starts to learn to read subtle patterns that our bodies are giving off. And then following that, they did a test to say, all right, now let's see if someone whose age we don't tell the computer, if it can then identify their age. And it turns out it was a very powerful test. We measure these with something called an AUC. A perfect test is a 1, flipping a coin is a 0.5. An exercise treadmill test is 0.85. This test was a 0.94. Very good for predicting age.
What's the use of that? What do you do with that in
Great
medicine?
question. That's what we thought. So it turns out there are a couple of uses. The first one is this. It turns out that if, let's say, you're 50 and the computer says you're 65, odds are high that you have a medical illness. It means your physiologic age, disease, frailty, other conditions are higher than the number of years you've lived. And that's important because it turns out that if you are in that category and you get treatment, we saw a number of people where their age got younger again. In fact, we have a pretty dramatic graphic of one of those types of cases.
Their ECG changed where they were manifesting that they were younger. What different is this? ECGs don't seem that interesting. What is it? Where's how do they differ?
It's amazing, actually, and because neural networks are black boxes, we don't really know what they see. They're just given a lot of information. They make these very subtle correlations that if we were able to remember the patterns from millions or hundreds of thousands of ECGs, we could pick up these fine details that we just can't see.
I thought it was just a sign.
It kind of looks like that, but clearly our bodies are giving off signals that reflect our underlying physiology.
Let's take a look at the chart that you were just mentioning. This is a chart, if we have it in the control room, that shows a person's age, I think, over time.
So on the horizontal axis, what we see is that when the person is 30 or so, their age looks to be by the ECG 50. And it keeps getting older until they're about 54. And at that point, they're like 70 by their ECG age. And then something dramatic happens. They get much younger. And you can see they continue to get younger, even as in time they're getting older.
So what happened in the circle? What was
So
the
this,
dramatic thing that
that's
happened?
exactly it. This was somebody who had a heart transplant, literally got the heart of a 16-year-old, got progressively younger, and then lost weight. Blood pressure and diabetes go away, and then they get progressively younger. So the main reason we're doing this sort of thing is trying to make healthcare more widely accessible by identifying people who need care.
So if you saw it on an ECG that you look at a decade or 2 decades older, you could very quickly get them in and try and figure out, put a plan of attack, what's wrong here, what happened to this person.
That's exactly right. And ECGs are now so widely available from a watch, from a smartphone, that people can be tested, even if you're in a rural community. And if there's a discrepancy, then maybe you should be seen by a bigger center, be seen by a doctor.
If you say you don't know precisely what the computer is picking up in terms of determining age, what's the first steps in terms of investigating if somebody seems a lot older than they are?
No, that's a great question. So first we'd go back to traditional medicine and do a general history and physical, check blood pressure, check blood sugar, check weight, those kinds of things to see if there's something specific that we can find.
You know, Apple has talked a lot about this, and Tim Cook has talked a lot about how this is the future for Apple. Have you worked directly with any companies that are doing things like this? Because you mentioned watches.
Yeah. So increasingly, we're in the process of talking to a number of potential partners because our goal is to identify these tools, to build these tools, and then we have to work with partners to make them widely available.
Did you ever see somebody who looked like they were decades younger than they actually were?
I was going to say, you got to
figure out what they're doing right.
You got to get Shatner. And you got to take him to the Mayo Clinic and start doing. He will do it because he was out in space. I mean, he would probably donate his time to see how he became. He's 88 and he's like in The Amazing Race or something, running around Europe. I mean, can't you go study him?
Would love to. Broadly speaking, though, I think the second potential use of this is there are lots of treatments that are being developed, studied, to see if we can prevent aging. As you know, some of my colleagues at Mayo are actively working on this. How do we know if they work? So we need some way to assess your age. And so if we further validate this and say the ECG is a marker of your age, and we come up with a new pill therapy regimen that makes that get smaller, makes that age get smaller, then maybe we're onto the right track.
Perfect microcosm of nature versus nurture, though, because I would argue a lot of it's genetic, but then a lot of it is how you treat yourself and your body as well. But good genes go a long way, do they? They
do. I think both play a role. There's certain things we're handed and certain things we can control.
Dr. Friedman, thank you very much for coming in. It's really interesting.
Thank you. It's been a
appreciate your
pleasure.
time.
Thank you.
Don't vape. Coming up, stocks to watch today, including some bad news for Boeing. One customer losing faith in the grounded 737 MAX. I'll tell you what they're doing about it next. Plus, an update on the case against Carlos Ghosn. That story is next. As we head to break, here's a look at yesterday's S&P 500 winners and losers.
When it comes to your customers' expectations,
they say less is more. But at MG, we say more is more. That means more spec than ever in the value-packed MG3, including 16-inch alloy wheels and sports seats to bring your journey to life. MG3, big on spec, skinny on price. From just $9,495 on the road, including a 7-year, 80,000-mile warranty. Make Tuesday your MG3 test drive day at WLMG Marylebone. MG, color the road. Specifications subject to model.
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere. Because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime. And the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, Text KIND to 81156.
I'm getting strawberry notes and a flutter of sweetness without adding sugar. Clever. It is. Yazoo Kids uses a lactose-reduced milk that enhances flavour without adding sugar or artificial sweeteners. Milky deliciousness and packed full of goodness. Very clever. Strawberry Yazoo Kids supports change for life. Yazoo, shake it up! Contains naturally occurring sugars. Milk is a source of calcium, which is needed for the maintenance of normal bones.
Did you know Currys PC World do business? Saving your business up to 30% with mega deals on computers and printers, electricals, large screen TVs, and even more. Top brands like HP, Microsoft, Epson, Sony. And if you find it cheaper from any major retailer, we'll match it. Get these deals before they're gone. Must end soon. Visit your nearest store or pcworldbusiness.co.uk/megadeals. T's and C's apply. Excludes Inc. and third-party sellers. Visit website for price promise details. Claim within 7 days.
Welcome back. You're watching Squawk Box, live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square.
Good morning, everybody. Let's take a look at the U.S. equity futures. It's Tuesday. Monday was a big up day. Dow was up by more than 230 points. Still didn't make up for all the losses that we saw of more than 600 points on Friday. This morning, though, you're seeing green arrows once again. Dow futures indicated up by about 58 points. S&P futures up by 5.5, and the NASDAQ up by 16. An update now on former Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn, who faces criminal charges in Tokyo. The Wall Street Journal says that Ghosn built a parallel business as an investor in Silicon Valley with his son, using millions of dollars that he received from an executive from one of Nissan's business partners in Oman. The Journal says that the operation comprises the most serious of the criminal charges against Ghosn, who has been released on bail, awaiting trial. The charge alleges that Ghosn stole Nissan money through a kickback scheme that funneled money from the Oman partner to Ghosn's Silicon Valley fund. Ghosn maintains his innocence. A spokesman said that he would be vindicated if given a fair trial.
All right, time now for the Executive Edge. We're going to start with a couple of stocks to watch in today's session. Russian firm Rostec confirming that its air leasing business has filed a lawsuit to cancel an order for Boeing 737 MAX jets. Really? The Financial Times reports that Avia Capital Services wants its $35 million deposit back plus $75 million in lost profit, more than $100 million in compensatory damages, and several times that amount in punitive damages. Boeing has declined comment. Would you rather fly on a fixed Boeing 737 MAX or a Russian-made jet?
Boeing?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Keep your money. I guess, but they'll probably go to Airbus. They won't probably
yeah.
buy it.
They're not going to make them at home.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
This is the global battle between Airbus and Boeing that Boeing has been winning for so long.
It almost looks like, I mean, maybe they are owed that. I don't know the details of the situation, but it almost looks like they're trying to profit from the whole situation there.
Well, every airline's going to be doing that. Like,
trying to get more than they're actually entitled to from the setbacks that they've suffered, I guess.
And part of the issue is if you go to Airbus, you're in the back of the line. I mean, you know, there's some value to actually having an order with Boeing.
Right.
But all of them, you know, like the list price is not the list price in any of these scenarios.
That's not part of the new BRT guidelines for what companies should be doing.
Sure it is. You take your customers into your...
No, to try and get more than you're owed.
Rostec is not part of the BRT.
No, they're not. Fair to say. Yeah, all right. Papa John's is reportedly set to name Arby's president Rob Lynch as its new CEO as soon as today. Lynch would replace Steve Ritchie, who took over from early last year following a bitter board dispute with founder John Schnatter. And the move also comes after activist investor Starboard Value has pushed for a change. I wonder if Arby's will still have the meat. Santola, do you think they'll still have it after the guy leaves? I don't know. And we're watching, speaking of meat, we're watching the shares of Beyond Meat after the stock surged more than 5% yesterday. Companies partnering with Yum Brands, I'm thinking about what Santola said, to test plant-based chicken nuggets at KFC and boneless wings at KFC. Mike says, why put any chicken in there? Just use the batter.
Fry the batter.
Just fry the batter.
That's what people are buying it for.
Fried batter.
If you're worried about not having meat, you might as well just
have the... There's a lot of batter on that KFC.
It's the best stuff, though. Original or crispy.
So the meat is optional. In the first Vacation movie, Cousin Eddie would make Hamburger Helper, but with no.
That's right.
With no hamburger, just the hamburger.
Just the helper.
Yeah, just the helper.
When we come back, is the run in technology stocks over? We will debate that question with Tim Lesko of Granite Investment Advisors. Stay tuned. You're watching Squawk Box right here on CNBC.
Delivering Alpha, the most important investor summit 9 years running. Strategy from leading alpha generators. Direct access to policymakers and government leaders. On September 19th, see who's calling the shots now. Go to deliveringalpha.com to attend this year's blockbuster event.
You will come away with ideas that you can put to work immediately.
Plus, special guest Vice President Mike Pence talks economy and trade war impact. Reserve your spot now at deliveringalpha.com.
Executive Ed just...
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying, all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere. Because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids with no downtime, and the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Live big and spend less on the brands you adore, and dine by the waterside. Who could want more? Lap up the savings as much as the view with Ted Baker, Hackett, Nike and Coach too. Lock Fine and Five Guys make it a date. You can shop, meet and eat every weekday till late. So sit back, unwind and let style lead the way. And give yourself a different day at Gunwharf Keys, waterfront outlet shopping.
Did you know Currys PC World do business? Saving your business up to 30% with mega deals on computers and printers, electricals, large screen TVs, and even more. Top brands like HP, Microsoft, Epson, Sony. And if you find it cheaper from any major retailer, we'll match it. Get these deals before they're gone. Must end soon. Visit your nearest store or pcworldbusiness.co.uk/megadeals. T's and C's apply. Excludes Inc. and third-party sellers. Visit website for price promise details. Claim within 7 days.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like our library of job description templates, which are free and easy to customize. We also give you the pigeon of perception, who only coos when you find the perfect CV, or when he's hungry. Okay, no pigeon then, but there are free job descriptions.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring. Visit Indeed.com/start today to use our library of completely free job description templates. Terms and conditions apply.
At the Bank of Antandek, they're looking for a mascot.
We need an icon. Something that says high flying to all our mortgage customers.
Like a falcon or a stallion.
Or even better, a parrot. Check it out.
Meanwhile, at Santander, they're concentrating on helping customers find ways to take years off their mortgage with their overpayment calculator. See what's possible at Santander.
All applications are subject to status and our lending criteria. Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage.
Beware tech shares. No, that's the topic of a new journal piece. It says the FANG trade is losing its bite. Among the headwinds, slowing growth, rising costs, potential for more government oversight, and trade war risk. Joining us now to discuss the best moves for tech investors is Tim Lesko. He's principal at Granite Investment Advisors. Good morning, Tim. I mean, add to that list, perhaps just, sometimes investor preferences changed, and sometimes the big winners on the way up to the peak are not always the ones that continue to do well. Now, that being said, FANG stocks, the NASDAQ, holding its own. Has anything happened that's caused you to rethink some of the core holdings you have in these big tech stocks?
I would say nothing significant has changed in the huge secular tailwind that many of these companies have. I think you have to separate the fundamentals of companies, economic growth, from perhaps some areas where there's been overvaluation, and consumer sentiment or call it investor sentiment might change the valuation of a Netflix. But most of the FANG stocks and across broader tech, you have a move towards more and more online advertising. They're basically advertising in media companies, and they're very domestically focused. So as we watch this trade war go back and forth, really doesn't hurt those core technology companies. Certainly the device makers and some of the more cyclical areas of tech, might be impacted.
Well, yeah, so if you like advertising-based companies that are not participants in China, you'd go for Facebook and Alphabet, except that you have other issues in terms of exactly that advertising model and whether they're going to be able to pursue it as profitably as they have in the future. Valuations have come down on those two for those reasons. So where does that leave you with those?
Well, I think you're getting to perhaps maybe a fairer valuation on the future stream of earnings from those kinds of companies. You're a full year and a half since Europe installed the kind of restrictions that we expect we're going to see here, and it really hasn't changed their European advertising growth. So even if we have economic slowdown, which we will every once in a while, it's not like these companies are carrying excess inventory or they have tremendously high costs. They're going to continue this secular move towards online advertising and just gain from the more traditional media outlets.
Now, speaking of device makers, as you mentioned, Apple yesterday had a pretty good day. Street analysts basically saying that they're going to get actually a break on component costs that is an offset to potential tariff headwinds. And, seems like the market kind of embraced that view, at least for a day. But the stock does remain, 10% below its record high. So what are you thinking in terms of Apple valuation-wise and then expectations for the next generation of iPhone?
Well, you can't pick a more sensitive company to everything that's going on with the trade war and global tensions and perhaps global economic slowdown than Apple. If you open up an Apple phone and try to figure out where all the components are coming from in a global supply chain, it's not that flexible a supply chain. So Apple really would like to see a resolution to the China issues. But it's been trading at a reasonable valuation. They have a ton of cash, and they have the kind of margins domestically and internationally that they can soak up some of the increase that they might see in tariffs. And particularly, certainly as currency changes have reduced component costs, that probably offsets it to a small degree. But Apple's got a very, very, very good supply chain management business. That's what Tim Cook did before he was CEO of Apple. So I don't think the world's really all that worried about Apple's ability to compete in whatever new world order we end up with.
Yeah, it seems to be betting that Cook can figure it out. Tim, thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, coming up, look at the shares of Johnson & Johnson giving back some of the gains following yesterday's ruling in Oklahoma. We'll bring you that story coming up next, still up about 2%. We're going to go to a quick break. First, let's check on the European markets and what's happening over there right now. The mix, not big moves, really one down, two up, just a little fraction gains and losses.
The problem with traditional cotton sheets.
At Romans, you can rent your next home from just £36, plus your first month's rent. No deposit.
No problem.
Romans, your trusted local property experts at romans.co.uk. Conditions and monthly fee apply.
Hemorrhoids. You talk to your GP, but you don't really get anywhere. Because the NHS has limited surgery for hemorrhoids, so you go on suffering in silence. Okay, maybe not so silent. It's time to speak to Xroid. They specialise in a new, fast, safe and effective procedure for hemorrhoids, with no downtime. And the procedure takes just 30 minutes or less. Don't be one of the 8 million people in the UK suffering in almost silence. Get back to what you love doing. Xroid. Be kind to your behind. For free advice on hemorrhoids, text KIND to 81156.
Did you know Currys PC World do business? Saving your business up to 30% with mega deals. On computers and printers, electricals, large screen TVs, and even more. Top brands like HP, Microsoft, Epson, Sony. And if you find it cheaper from any major retailer, we'll match it. Get these deals before they're gone. Must end soon. Visit your nearest store or pcworldbusiness.co.uk/megadeals. T's and C's apply. Excludes Inc. and third-party sellers. Visit website for price promise details. Claim within 7 days.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like our library of job description templates, which are free and easy to customize. We also give you the pigeon of perception, who only coos when you find the